أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق ونور عرش أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا وسيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. I begin in Allah's name, the beneficent, the merciful, and we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity to continue to exist on this earth, struggling to improve our ways of life through free will, so that we improve our societies, we become good role models within our communities, and we allow others to also follow that pathway, so that on Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will recognize our efforts and reward us with the highest stations, inshallah, in the next world in paradise. Tonight's lecture is primarily aimed at discussing the importance of our duty as citizens within a country, hence the name civilians. And of course, we call it civic duty. And when we say civic duty, it's the duty of a citizen to uphold and promote the government that nurtures them and protects them. And it's important for us also to participate and to give our opinions to make sure that the governance and the legislation that is passed within the system is conducive to a positive, upright lifestyle that is also acceptable within the parameters of Islam. As we know, we live in a very diverse society. There are many religions, there are many lifestyles. There are allowances within this system where Islam forbids, for example, alcohol, pornography, and such. But in Islam, we also have to understand that there's diversity within the community. And while we must abstain from those kinds of behaviors, we must also voice our concerns for those, but we must also respect those who wish to practice that from the perspective of humanity. In this conversation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined upon us an obligation by which to promote good and forbid evil. As Allah says, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. You are the best in the community. You promote good, you forbid evil. وَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ, and you believe in God. Here in Surah Al Imran, verse number 104, Allah says, وَلْتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةً يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, then from among you there should be a party who invites to good and enjoins what is right and forbids what is wrong, and that it shall be that who will be the successful ones. Meaning when Allah says, وَلْتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ, it doesn't mean that the rest of the community should not be doing يدعون إلى الخير, you see, ويأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر. No, what it means in general, in principle, it means that there should be a group of representatives, leaders, who go and represent the moral principles of Islam in making sure that legislation and methods by which the societies will adhere to for their livelihood and their day-to-day affairs should be conducive within the principles of Islam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this an obligation on all the believers. Amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar is an obligation on all the believers. It's not an obligation for a few to lead. But here we're talking about leadership in the role modelship as a representative of the community. And we need to talk about this. And today we have a good panel of brothers who are engaged, especially my brother Farouk, who is going to be joining us today in the panel, who is involved quite actively in the government, in the sense of in the politics of things. And I just want to establish some fundamental understandings. While we know that politics is essential in society, unfortunately, historically, politics has had a very bad spin. And people who have been involved in politics, or if someone says, oh, he's a politician, what it means is he's saying something that he's not going to do. He has basically two tongues. That's typically when we say, oh, he's a politician, or this person is just going to, pull wool over our eyes, or he's going to fool us. So, but that's the negative aspect. But all politics are not negative. Politics is essential. It's important because governance in society is an essential integral part. Our Holy Prophet played the role of guiding people in the government system. Imam Ali alayhi salam was a leader in the system of government that he established in Medina and then, of course, in Kufa. What we find is that the necessity of good leadership is an integral part of the human fabric. Adam, being the first human being on earth, was also the first prophet of mankind. And he was appointed the Khalifatullah, meaning the appointee of God on this earth. That essential nature lays the foundation that humanity is always in need of leadership. The problem we have is that our leadership, many a times when they gain the power, they promise to get the power. And once they get the power, either they don't care to fulfill the promises or they're unable to do it because of other forces that prevents them from going there. So it's a mixture of both. And unfortunately, we've noticed a decline in the political system, especially in the West. Of course, in the East, it's always been managed by puppeteers, unfortunately. So the real democracy that Allah has decreed upon us based on Shura, it doesn't really exist much, except in some countries that are struggling to establish it now. Having said that, we find that, unfortunately, our system is rigged. And because it's rigged to ensure a certain direction by an elite group of people, we become victims in the political system. But the sad thing is that when we do see this rigged system and we do see things sort of rather limited in scope, where you notice in the United States, a third party has never been elected in government in terms of actually leading as a president, never. It's only been a bipartisan system, which sort of raises question marks. Why not? Why not a third party? Oh, no, we're just the Democrat and the Republicans, that's it. Either you join one of those. So why is it limited? What's the reason? Yeah, you have an electoral college that makes sure that there's a group of people who actually decide who should be the president, though there's a majority vote of the people. So you don't win the majority vote. You have an electoral college that basically appoints the next president. These are all questions that make us dissatisfied many a times. It makes us feel like government is a rigged system. It doesn't help, and therefore we shouldn't participate in it. So I hear people saying, well, let's not go vote, it doesn't pay, or let's not get involved in government because most of these leaders are criminals anyway. They all have bad agendas and so on and so forth. And I think sending out a blanket statement as such is also very non-productive, is not a good thing, especially for citizens in a community. Even if the government has these inclinations, as citizens, we have an obligation to voice our concerns, even if it means to vote a vote of no confidence within our voting system. Let the system know that we have a voice and that we are going to play a part, whether it's in local politics or national politics or international politics for that matter. We need to be proactive in ensuring that our voices are heard. You will see that politicians, as wicked as they can be, if the people rise against them, then they become more malleable, as one would say. They tend to follow the people's voices more because they find the people's force is ultimately what can topple governments. Unfortunately, another problem exists, which we all need to understand, and we need to help it. Every society is composed of what we call vocal minorities, and then we have what we call silent majorities. Silent majorities acquiesce power and authority to the vocal minorities, and the vocal minorities become the voice of the silent majority. And unfortunately, when the vocal minority is in the wrong direction, unfortunately, the silent majority tends to follow it. And as a result, it gets damaged in time. So what we need to do is awaken that majority, which is the most difficult thing to do, or we counter the vocal minority with a better vocal minority and hopefully replace that vocal minority with a better vocal minority. For that's just the way the world works. So without further ado, I'd like to open up this panel discussion, and for us to understand that in any country that we live in, it's very important for us to be aware of the politics of the region. Who are our representatives in our local um, districts, who the governor is, what are their thoughts, because governors have a lot of power. As you see now with the COVID-19 situation, it's the governors who are mandating whether their state can do certain things and cannot do certain things. And if you disobey them, you could be incarcerated. So mayors have very high positions, councillors have high positions, and of course, congressmen and senators, they have high positions, and of course, president and vice president. All these do play a role within how we voice our concerns. And let us not say that when I do voice my concern, it's not going to be heard, or if I do participate in it, oh, now I'm becoming sort of a chameleon joining a rigged evil system. I don't think the latter statement is fair, given the fact that we've chosen to live in a country under its law and under its civilian laws. Then I think it's an obligation upon us to participate in its citizenship and to ensure that this country progresses and is protected and its longevity is increased. Meaning, as citizens, we must care for our country. For example, in the United States, we must care for our country. We must make sure that our civil systems are good. We must voice our concerns for the safety of our communities. We must be concerned when our soldiers are dying. We must be concerned when other countries are being attacked. All of these should be a concern for us, for it is an obligation within Islam for Muslims to be concerned about even our neighbors, even our immediate neighbors. We must be concerned about them, even if they're not believers in Islam. So that obligation is upon us. And inshallah, in this dialogue tonight, we will address some issues. And bear in mind, we may have certain statements that we make, or somebody may be endorsing somebody. That's perfectly fine. We are here at Enlight. We're not here to endorse anybody. We're here to endorse whoever is the best out there. And it's difficult today in the choices that we've been given, especially in the presidential elections. It's very difficult, quite honestly, I'll say that. But let's make an argument for it and make the best decisions, inshallah. And we pray that whatever the decision and whatever the outcome in the elections or in the governance of the local as well as national politics, we pray that the overall result is good for us and for humanity. Brother Amili, inshallah, you will take over.
Thank you, Brother Hassanain. This discussion on civic engagement really brings to point a verse from the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim, that God does not change the affair of a community until they seek to change the affairs themselves first. So if you and I are not trying to play a proactive role in trying to change our situation first, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises, I will not change your affair unless you proactively try to change your situation first. Alhamdulillah, we're honored today to be joined once again by Brother Muhammad Jafar from Toronto. And also we're very glad to have with us today Brother Farouk, who actually is a senior advisor on Muslim engagement for the Joe Biden's presidential campaign. So thank you both for being here. Brother Farouk, would you like to start off and make some introductory comments, please?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum, Hajj. It's been a really long time since we've seen each other.
It's an honor.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to participate in the program tonight. My name is Farouk Mita. I got recently appointed back in March to be Vice President Joe Biden's senior advisor on Muslim engagement for his presidential campaign. Just a little bit about my background. I grew up in Florida, but I moved to Washington, D.C. back in 2011 to take a job in, at that time, President Obama's administration. And I've been living in D.C. since then. And I've really been a big supporter and proponent of Muslims getting involved in the civic process, specifically in government. I feel like Muslims are actually a very civically engaged community. We get involved in our masajid, we get involved in our community organizations and humanitarian efforts. But we've been slower to get engaged in the civic process when it comes to government and politics. One of the things that I am a part of is an organization called Mgage, which maybe many of you have heard of, which is a Muslim American political and civic engagement organization that actually does have a Michigan chapter. And one of the goals of that organization is, how do we get Muslims to engage in their local political process? How do we encourage them to vote? How do we actually turn them out to vote? How do we go to our state legislatures and to even Congress and advocate and lobby on issues that are really important to us. We all sit around the kitchen table in our families and we talk about the pains and the struggles of Muslims, not only in this country, but in many of our countries of origin. And it doesn't really go much farther than that. Once we have those conversations, we kind of throw our hands up in the air and we give up. And I think one of the things that I've really tried to work on, both personally and through Mgage, is to say, hey, how do we turn that talk into action? And how do we become a minority in this country that has political power, that has influence, that can use the values of our faith to promote justice and peace and equality for all Americans, including for Muslims? And that's one of the reasons why I took this position with Joe Biden's campaign. This is going into November. I don't need to tell any of you or those of you who are viewing this program how important this election is coming up in November. We, over the last several years as a community, have really borne the political brunt of what's happening in the country right now. I remember sitting back in 2015 when then candidate Donald Trump was running for office, and he, CNN and all the major networks broadcast his speech when he said he was going to ban Muslims from coming into the country. And I sat back and I said, that's never going to happen. And there's no way this is ever going to happen. And sure enough, a year and a half later, it happened. I can talk more about Joe Biden if it's appropriate, but I really want to say that, when our community takes a beating like that and takes a punch, we need to be organized and we need to be able to throw a punch back. And we need to be able to collectively organize in our local communities and say, hey, we are here and we matter and we have a voice and we are going to make our opinions heard, win or lose. And I think this election presents an opportunity to do that. And I don't want to speak for too long. I'd like to have the discussion, so I'll leave it there and hope we can have a more engaging dialogue tonight, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Farouk. Before I open it up for an open discussion, I want to make sure we have let Brother Muhammad Jafar please share some introductory comments, and then inshallah we'll have an open discussion on the important issues at hand.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I'm so happy we have someone in the forefront, Farouk, where the battle is. But at the same time, even if one party loses, I hope you still will be out there holding on firmly to the rope of God, as the brother Zuhair was reciting before, and trying not to divide the world, but trying for all of us to achieve peace on this earth. Because it does say in the Quran, وَأَتَسِمَ بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا, hold on to the rope of God together. But it also says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, we're also brothers and sisters, let's make peace. Now, I can say a few words of my career in the past. I don't think it's important, but I'll throw it out because in my last job, I did get to meet Trump a few times. I did get to meet John McCain, and he came to speak in our office. Obama came to him, but I didn't have the time at that time. Too bad now, because he did make it to president. This is before when he became president. Ted Kennedy, we met him at 21 Club. All these things did happen. We did get to meet extremely important people in the world. Like, I pray that you get to do that and do more good with that, Farouk, and all of us, because we're all together here trying to make the world a better place. Here in Canada, they come and knock at our door. They call them MPs. And it's funny, and MPPs, they come and knock at our door and they say, can you vote for us? They even come to our masjids, which is beautiful. I love that. So whether at work, where I'm at the Rockefellers, for example, or at home, we all should not be scared. One of the things I realized is when I meet all these people, I almost felt like when, if not the extreme, but just say when Musa alayhi salam and Harun went to meet Pharaoh, that was a tremendous probably experience. And Allah's telling them, go to Pharaoh, he has transgressed. And you know what Pharaoh says? He says, I'm the Lord. He thought he was God. But one of the things that I guess this week we talked about is when you go and talk to Pharaoh, talk to him with a kind tongue, kind, gentle words, because that will affect his heart. Kindness works. At the same time, if you look at history, it's not just us. Allah's always had our back. You know, if you look at Surah Taha, verse 45, 47, Allah had the back of Musa and Harun alayhi salam. But if you look at the world, from Confucius' time, he taught the world to follow virtue. This is how you would get your government, your people to follow you. So today's time, they call it quid pro quo. You give me a vote, and in that favor you do for me, I will make sure I try my best to help you. And I think this is where, Farouk, you're going to try to help us, or all the world, basically, not just Muslims, but all of us, to get good things happening on this, because there's a lot of injustice and oppression and wrong. And there's a lot of need that need to be fixed. And hopefully we can do that just by talking about it today, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Muhammad. And inshallah, to talk about and further this discourse on civic engagement, I think one thing I'm interested to start the discussion to get your thoughts on, Brother Farouk, is, when we talk about voting for a presidential candidate, one question Muslims definitely have in mind is that no matter whom we vote for, that candidate is going to go and do things that are, going to harm Muslims, for example, abroad. For example, there have been recent allegations against Joe Biden talking about, he voted for the war on Iraq many years back. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts and how do you deal with that personally when you support a candidate who, no matter who the candidate is in the West, that candidate is going to go out and do things that you may not stand for ethically. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Look, I think no candidate is perfect, right? And everyone has, when you're in office long enough, you make decisions, and sometimes you look back and you wish you didn't make those decisions. And I think an example is what you said with, Joe Biden and the war in Iraq, where he voted for the war and then he came back and later realized that it was a mistake and actually helped President Obama, lead the troop withdrawals from Iraq and wind down the war back in 2009 and 10. But more broadly, I would say that I think this election is a good example of the degrees of harm that can be caused, right? If you look at the Muslim ban as an example, where many of the countries that we come from are now banned from coming into this country. If you look at refugees and the cuts to refugee numbers that this administration has made, many that affect Muslims that try to come here fleeing persecution, for example, or seeking a better life, that's a huge difference. Last year, as an example, we had allowed about 20,000 or maybe less, 16 to 20,000 refugees into the United States. Whereas Joe Biden is saying, I'm going to make that number 125,000, right? If you look at some of the things that are happening in the Middle East right now, or in just around the globe in general, whether it's India or Palestine or what's happening to the Uyghurs in China, I would argue that some of that is driven by the fact that we have our own strongman in office here who demonizes people, is xenophobic. There's bigotry coming from the words of our leader. And that's something that this country really hasn't seen in a very long time to this degree, right? Or maybe never has seen. So when we look at what's happening to Muslims and we look at like the role of US leadership globally, for example, there's no question that there's no moral credibility right now for the US to go to China and say, hey, what are you doing in these internment camps with the Muslims in your country? Or if you go to India and say, hey, what's happening in Kashmir? We don't have the leadership to do that. So while I agree that there's always negatives that come with any leader, I think that today we see like a stark difference between somebody who has demonstrated like very little compassion and somebody who is more compassionate, who has a more global understanding of the world and champions human rights relative to somebody who doesn't. So I think there's sometimes you can argue there's not really a big difference between two candidates. I think this year we see like a really stark difference. And that's, to me, a way to demonstrate that a vote does matter. And there are different degrees of how policy is conducted to serve humanity or to help, Muslims in general.
Thank you, Brother Hassanain. I'm also interested to hear some of your thoughts on this issue, where regardless the concerns that many individuals have of no matter who we vote for, that individual will go out and do things that are against our moral and ethical conscience. So how do we resolve with that and vote for a candidate, though we know he's going to go out and do things we may not stand for?
Yeah, that's a good question. And thank you, Brother Farouk, for sharing your thoughts. I think it's impossible to ever vote somebody who is not, who's a fallible individual, and while they represent you, that they will commit everything that is good in their period of leadership. Of course, only the most God-conscious people will be the ones who will ensure that such a journey is taken, but bearing in mind that governance in a very complicated country like this country, but in fact, every country is quite complicated. There's so many layers. You know, you've got special interest groups, you've got constituents, you've got different groups that have very powerful positions, even in Congress, that will now block you from doing something if you do this. You know, this idea of back scratching is something that's inevitable, as Brother Muhammad mentioned about quid pro quo. But of course, there's a limit to how far you can go. So there is no question that no matter who's voted in, such individuals will not represent us completely. Bear in mind that these people have also been voted in by other people of other religions and other ideologies too, right? And they have to satisfy their desires too. And sort of you have to come in between that and figure out what is the best way. I mean, I agree with Brother Farouk that given what our current president is doing in one way, in another way, you'll find that the current president is exposing a lot of the inward corruption, though he is himself part of that, but he's exposing a lot, which I think if you really look, I mean, I was shocked when I thought that, you know, George W. Bush committed the crimes that he did as a president. Then when Obama came, I heard that the number of drone attacks in Afghanistan, for example, in Muslim countries, doubled, if not more than that, you know? So sometimes you're shocked at how come a president like Obama would do that. Now, of course, who's pushing the buttons, who's causing it, God only knows, right? It's hard sometimes to point fingers. But Donald Trump today has shown us the amount of power he has, that Congress has become docile. You'll find that the judicial system is sort of biting its tongue while it's coming, but he's basically dictating. And then, of course, we've got a president who can put, you know, judges in local positions that do have a big impact on legislation. So we have to sort of examine this and say, okay, so something like this, when you get somebody who likes power the way he does, almost like the presidency is what we call a live show. You know, it's happening like the shows that he used to do on television. And the question I would ask you, Brother Farouk, is, you know, voting for a person like Joe Biden, for example, some people say that voting for him would be sort of the lesser of two evils, because Trump is so out there, then maybe Biden is a little more civil, you know, in his ways. He's more what we call traditional, more within the structure of the perpetual governance that America has been having. So these are questions people are asking, because what sort of regulations are going to be passed? It's very difficult, honestly. When you go to the voting booth and you're going to sort of choose this president, something in your conscience says that, what if this president commits a terrible deed tomorrow? Will I be liable on Judgment Day? Will God say to me that you supported this man, and that's why you have this problem? Of course, God doesn't hold us liable more than what we can handle. No question about that. But I think the bottom line is, if we have two candidates running for presidency and we have no other option, you know, it's a democracy with no options. You got two options. That's it. It's boiled down to these two. And you've got to choose between these two. I mean, when Bernie Sanders was running, he was running like a trailblazer. And it's interesting how the system just put the brakes on him. No, you're not coming in. You're antithetical to our system because you have the S word, you know. You're a socialist. Oh my God, we can never accept you. Like, as if we don't practice socialism in America. Government giving us money right now is what? Right, so we're playing with words here, right? Medicare for all. Oh, but that's socialism. Yeah, but then everybody wants Medicare for all. Government should, because we're paying so much taxes. We're paying 50% of our income is going to taxes. 50% between sales tax, property tax, income tax. 50% is going towards it. Should we not? So just a quick question, Brother Farouk. And, you know, this is just a voice that's coming from the public, not necessarily my opinion, but, you know, voting for the lesser of two evils, as a general question, I'm sure you receive that quite often. How do you answer that question?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. Look, I I'm going to disagree with you on part of what you said, if it's okay.
Sure. Look, by the way, we have to agree to disagree agreeably.
Yeah.
And I love disagreements. Trust me, I love disagreements.
So I think earlier in this campaign, Joe Biden was running as the establishment candidate who was the presumptive guy. He was in it and he was going to win it. But I think what you saw earlier this year was that got turned on its head, right? After Iowa and New Hampshire, Joe Biden had no money. He had no organization. And actually, Bernie Sanders was the front runner. He had more delegates. He had all the cash, other than Michael Bloomberg, which I won't get into him. But, Senator Sanders was really the front runner. We were running afraid in a sense that if we don't win this next state or two, we might not survive. So I think the system was different this year, and it was way more fair than in 2016. When you saw Joe Biden win on Super Tuesday, he didn't even campaign in a majority of those states, didn't even visit them because we didn't have the resources to do that. So he became the underdog, and then he ended up getting to where he is now. But on the policy front, look, I would argue that I don't think that Joe Biden is the lesser of two evils. I think if you look at the two candidates head to head, you have one who is supporting a Muslim ban. You have one who is calling countries overseas, some Muslim, some not, by bad names, which I'm not going to say here. Right. You have a candidate in Joe Biden who believes in a foreign policy of human rights and democracy, who's spoken out on things, including on Israel and Palestine, which I know is important to a lot of Muslims. Whereas you have a guy in Donald Trump who's the complete opposite. Also, some of the progressive positions that drew people in our community, particularly to Bernie Sanders. I think if we look closely at Joe Biden's platform, whether it's on education, where he's now adopted a free college tuition for families who are making $125,000 or less, he's adopted really progressive positions on criminal justice reform, and he's recognized the historic and systematic racism and discrimination that's been in our country. And you look at his immigration policy on what's happening at our southern border with Texas, with children being separated from their families. I think that I would argue that in this race, there is no lesser of two evils. There's just two very different philosophies, two very different candidates. One anecdotal thing I'll tell you about Biden, he doesn't always do things because of politics. I just, heard about a story through our campaign where he actually called a Muslim in Michigan, in Dearborn, who was suffering from coronavirus. And he called this guy and he had a 22-minute conversation with him about his family. The gentleman is a Palestinian. He's been isolated in his home, away from his young kids and his wife. And he just called this guy and he talked to him. He had compassion, and he just does things like that, right? He calls people and just engages them. And it's things that you don't see on the news. We don't put it on social media. They're just things that he does. So I think there's a big difference between a leader that has compassion and can connect with people and try to the best of his ability to serve humanity, and somebody who's just a complete opposite of that, right? So I would disagree with the lesser of two evils in this election specifically.
Brother Muhammad, you are muted, so we can't hear what you're saying.
Just unmute
I
yourself.
was saying, it doesn't matter who wins. At the end of the day, whoever wins, we have to not give up, because if you don't say anything, that's injustice. If we don't, I think there's Edmund Burke is saying, by being silent, you're part of the problem. You're not doing anything. Imam said in Karbala, people stayed quiet. When the Prophet died, people stayed quiet. They allowed injustice to happen. So whoever is in power, one of the things I guarantee you everybody's scared of is the people. We do have a voice. And we saw that in 79 in Iran. When the people rise, the politicians get scared. They say, yeah, let's do something to keep them quiet. Okay, give them some money. And I know that's a saying in history where when the dog is barking, give them a bone and they'll shut up. Unfortunately, that does happen. But at the same time, when there's oppression and there's a silence of oppression going on this earth, I think there's a scholar named Frere who's saying oppressed people have become powerless because they stay quiet. So we can't be quiet anymore. I think it's time that we just say, all right, Farouk, you're going to represent us. Wherever it is, we're going to give you our issues, and you help us to do something right on this world. And what can you do for us, Farouk, while you're up there? I mean, I would love to hear that. What can you do to hear, hear our voices? Because I know when Hassanain and I were running a madrasa years ago, we wrote letters to Bill Clinton about Bosnia. Clinton wrote us back, and then he says, don't worry, I'm going to do something. Unfortunately, something tough happened, a lot of bombing, but at least the hunger and this craziness stopped. So what could you do for us, Farouk?
Yeah, before I answer that, I want to comment on one other thing you said, the thing you said before. One interesting thing that happened after 2016 was it actually awoke our community. You see now in the United States, in 2018, and even in 2020 now, we've had Muslims running for office at all levels of government. Even Virginia, which is a neighboring state to where I am, we now have 7 Muslims elected to office now at the local and state level. We were at 1 in 2016. And that same story is happening in other parts of the country. And I think alhamdulillah, we're building our own leadership in our communities of people that are saying that, you know what, I'm going to have my voice and I'm going to run and I'm going to show that we can win and we can make a difference on policies that affect our communities. As far as what I can do to help, look, I think one of my primary responsibilities in this job is to elevate the voices in the issues of our community. I can tell you that me being a senior advisor on the campaign has made a world of difference just on how this campaign talks and thinks about engaging Muslims. Anything that touches the community in terms of what we're communicating, I get to chop on it and look at it and read it and comment on it and edit it. I've been a part of many policy conversations, many statements that we're putting out where I actually have a say in how the vice president comments on these issues. And I think that's a huge win for the community because it for 2 reasons. One is it shows that the campaign recognizes that this is a community that needs to be heard, or else they wouldn't be listening to me, right? I think that's one part of it. I think the second part of it is we've been able to really create a dialogue with the communities across our country, with our policy team and others, to have their voices and concerns raised and then put into the policies that we're promoting and crafting as the campaign goes along. So I've seen that level of interest from the campaign, and I think it's a huge benefit to the community to have somebody, and whether it's me or somebody else, it doesn't matter, but to have that position in the campaign is extremely important. The last thing I'll say is, one of the key things that we're trying to do is to also make sure that this campaign reflects the diversity of this country. And if we win, that a Biden administration reflects the diversity of the nation as well. But we're not waiting till then. We're starting now. We have a group in our foreign policy working groups that's dedicated just to diversity. So we're making sure that our Middle East, South Asia, Latin America, whatever our policy groups are, even on the domestic side, are diverse. And one of my roles is to make sure that we have Muslim voices in those working groups, in our staff on the campaign. And I'm doing that. I think those things are extremely valuable as we look to make a difference on certain issues that have impacted us negatively. But B, as we look to build our talent of the future of people who run for office, who work on campaigns and become activists and give them that experience to build their careers in this space. So I just think that's another example of why this process is so important.
And it's powerful. And it's very powerful. In my town, we live in Canada, in Toronto.
I was born in Toronto.
Oh, okay. So no wonder why you're so, pro-Muslim. Actually, everything you're saying sounds so Canadian. I don't know what's going on here. Anyway, in our town,
he just took our honor away as Americans.
Anyway, I always say if Michigan is tired, you can always come to Canada. Anyway, so what I was saying is in my town, the last vote where Trudeau won, our specific town, we elected an MP twice, the last 2 elections. In the last election, he won by 212 votes, nothing. But can you imagine if we as Muslims says, okay, we believe in justice, but we just stayed quiet. Not even Muslims, all of us as humans. I know even other faiths are the same, that, okay, turn the other cheek when you see something wrong, love the enemy. But you know what? The whole faith, all of our faiths does talking about standing up for justice, not only men, but also women. Have you heard of Mary Shelley, right? Who wrote Frankenstein? Her mother is incredible. And you're talking about 200 years ago. She fought for women to go to school. If she didn't say anything and didn't write things, maybe that would have been taken much longer. So whatever you do, Farouk, I'm sure it's going to make a dent in this world. So keep it up, my friend.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I mean, if you look at the communities, the Muslims in America and where we are located geographically, I think it's a blessing. If you look at every 4 years, the states that always matter are Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia. And we have very large communities there. People might not in the younger generation might not remember this, but George W. Bush in the year 2000, he only won by 537 votes in Florida. That was it.
What?
And I always use that as an example to show that although we're small in numbers, we can have an outsized impact if we organize ourselves and if we unite and really come together to get involved and to have our voices heard from a values and justice perspective. You know, we're a very diverse community as Muslims, but I think our ethics and our values from Islam can guide how we engage. And I think if we stick to those values that we've learned from the prophets and from Imam Ali, for example, we can really make a big difference for humanity.
Brother Farouk, if I can jump in, quick question. When you are a senior advisor, do you advise on national issues or also on international issues?
Both.
Both?
Both, yes.
And when you do advise on international issues, obviously, and it's pertaining to a Muslim country and so on, I mean, your objective is to represent your position in light of your obligation as a Muslim, so that you make Biden and his team acutely aware of where the proper Muslim perspective is? Or do you generally say, well, this is the general trend of the Muslim community, and therefore it's okay? The reason I'm asking this from an ethical perspective, what is your general priority? Is it the status quo Muslim thought, mindset, or is it what you believe should be the Quran, the Holy Prophet, the Sunnah of the Prophet, and so on? How do you sort of work with that, knowing that, let's say, your Muslim community is not necessarily correct in that issue, but now you have to advise this president, potentially Biden is the president, right? What would you generally do?
That's a good question, actually. I don't know if I've thought about that 100%, but I would say that it's maybe a combination of the two, right? One of the things that I've been doing, over the last couple of months is organizing virtual events like this, where I talk to 20, 30, 40 people from any given community. And they come to me and they say, hey, here's what we care about. And here's how we feel about what's happening in Kashmir, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in China, for example. Part of my job is to take that sentiment from the community and translate it back to the campaign. So when they're crafting the policy, I say, look, I just talked to these people in Wisconsin yesterday, and they asked me about this question, and we need to be very considerate about how we're addressing it and to make sure that their views, assuming I find the common thread between the various conversations that I have, I take that common thread and say, here's what the sentiment of the community is. I also think personally, I look through the lens of the faith and of the Quran and the Sunnah and the example of the prophets and the Imams. And I look at, what is it that is within the bounds of the faith? I don't usually see a major contradiction between what I hear from the community, especially on foreign issues. On domestic issues, it's a little bit different. But on the international issues, I don't see a stark difference. So I try to balance the two. But I think now that I'm kind of talking through it, I think a lot of it stems from what are the people saying? And then how do I best translate that into something that can be actionable by the campaign?
Thank you, brother. Just one question before Brother Muhammad, you jump in. There's one question coming in from the viewers, and I'm interested, as someone who obviously endorses Joe Biden, I'm interested to hear your perspective and thoughts. It's a quite blunt comment, but I'm interested to hear how you would respond to it. And the comment states, I'm just going to read it line for line. It says, both Joe Biden and Trump have sexual assault allegations against them. Joe Biden voted for the war in Iraq. Neither can cohesively speak. They both seem similar, if you ask me. What would you say to that?
Can you read the second part again, about the Iraq part?
He said, so the first part was about both of them having sexual allegations against them. The second part was about Joe Biden voting for the war in Iraq. And the third part was the person made an assessment that neither can speak very cohesively. So they both seem the same to them. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. On the first on the first part of the question, I would say that you have to look at how the person handles what's being said about them, right? We saw Joe Biden get on national television a few days ago. I don't know if it was Sunday or Monday, and he said that I deny these allegations, although I believe that there's a place for women to have their voices heard, and I'm calling for transparency in order to get the facts out, for example, from the Senate archives. Then you see somebody like Donald Trump, who basically uses vulgar terminology, demonizes the women that are accusing him, has 23 times more women accusing him on that note, right? So that's one point. So how do they address it is the question, because nobody really knows what the truth is at the end of the day, right? So we have to look at how they conduct themselves, in my opinion. On the second point, I would say that yes, Joe Biden voted for the war in Iraq, and he's explained why he believes he was deceived and why he went back and said that it was the wrong decision. I think that speaks volumes for somebody who can say that I've been in office a long time and I've made some mistakes, and I'm willing to go back and own up to those mistakes when I think that I've made them. Whereas you have another guy in Trump who has made tons of mistakes, including on how we've handled coronavirus, and has refused to own up to them. And I'm sorry for getting overly political, but I really want to draw the contrast because of the question. The third thing about coherent speech is what I'm guessing. Somebody asked me this question the other day, and my answer was the rigors of the campaign are it's a 24/7 thing. And a guy like Joe Biden, if he was not able to mentally keep up, he wouldn't be able to keep up. I mean, some of the things that we see on the news are like small slips of the tongue that are photoshopped and cut and spun a certain way. But then somebody else came in and said, and this is in a panel discussion, and said, we have a guy right now who is literally telling people to drink bleach and inject themselves with bleach. If that guy isn't mentally fit and we don't, look at that, and we're looking at this other guy who may have a slip of the tongue, then I don't know what to tell you. So I would say there's in my opinion, very stark contrasts, even on that third point that the questioner raises.
Brother Farouk, before Mohammed, you jump in, what do you think, from your experience in politics, is the mindset of the citizens of this country who are willing to forego a man putting his hand in the wrong place on a woman, doing all those collective bad things, right? Narcissism to the top, okay? And I'm not endorsing, either side, but I'm just saying, let the facts speak for themselves. I mean, when you have, press conference and everybody is fake news, you're fake news, I don't like you, you're fake news. If you praise me, I like you. If you don't praise me, I don't like you. And then you have a 30% population that's still holding on. From your experience, why do you think these people are holding on to him so much? Is the other side so bad that they only see this side as good despite what this president is doing?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that. I think my first thought is that I think, and this is me speaking in my personal capacity, that I think the election of President Obama exposed some very deep racial divides in this country that were hidden for a long time. And I think that Trump is a manifestation of that. He's the symptom, in a sense, of that. The second thing I'll say is that I think that the Democratic Party is very diverse, and it's pluralistic, and it welcomes difference of opinion. I think the Republican Party is very ideologically driven, and they've got very clear delineated goals of what they want to accomplish. An example, something that you pointed out, is the judiciary and the appointment of judges, right? I think that some of these people on the Republican side have said, you know what, we understand how this guy is, but it's okay because he's going to do what we want. And he's going to carry out our agenda of whether it's tax cuts for the wealthy, or keeping immigrants out, or appointing judges at a record level to build that long-term impact and influence on the law. I think that there's a few core things like that they really care about, and it doesn't matter who the guy is and how bad he might be or what his values are. He's going to do what we want, and I think that's ultimately what wins out at the ballot box.
Farouk, jumping in here, I don't want you to feel that we're attacking you because you're our brother.
No, this is great. I love it. I love it.
No, it's a blessing you're here. And I mean, I grew up in the corporate world, so I know, and I hate to say this, but they will put a token minority. I call it the Uncle Tom effect. They'll put someone in just so, yes, master, and it continues, and they don't say anything. So if you ever read the Quran, chapter 5, verse 54, God talks about that he will bring a group of people who will love him and he will love them. But one of the key parts is that they're not afraid to be criticized. They will stand up for the truth no matter what. If that means they lose their job, if they don't get heard, they'll do it. I hope you get to do that, hopefully, and I hope you do. Do you get the chance to do that? Do you stand up even when they don't agree? Like when Joe Biden doesn't agree with you, do you still say what's correct?
Yeah, and
You're not scared.
And the interesting thing is that people want to hear it. You know what I mean? People ask me. I get shared on policies and documents that really aren't even in my lane, but people will be like, "Hey, Farouk, we would like your opinion on this." And sometimes what I say, actually, most of the time, what I say, they're like, "Yeah, that's a good point. We should make that change, or we should articulate it that way." And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But no one's ever said, "Hey, we expect you to, stay in your place and stay in your lane." In fact, it's been the opposite. Hey, we want that unique perspective because we want to make sure that all the voices of every community are heard, even if we may not agree on everything. So I think it's actually been for somebody like me who's been around in presidential politics, even since Obama's 2008 election, this is the most engaged I've seen myself or the community on having a voice, a real substantive voice.
Beautiful.
That's
The
great.
other
That's
party,
great.
the other party keeps saying you're fired, so I'm kind of worried for you now. But hopefully,
No. He's not going to get fired. He's a good representative. Food for thought, Brother Farouk, if you don't mind, Brother Amel, I'm just jumping in. Food for thought, and correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, the GOP, good old politics, right? GOP is known as, the Republican Party is known as to be more pro-religion, pro-God. And of course, you got a very extreme group in that group also that would love to destroy the whole Middle East so Jesus can come back tomorrow, right? But as a general rule, the GOP, the Republican Party, is known to be more inclined towards religious institutions. So when you look at nonprofit organizations, private schools that teach religion, it appears that they tend to be more inclined in that direction, right? And speaking from our own angle and perspective as running an Islamic school, right? We find that public schools have mandated very strict rules against speaking about God. And historically, I have understood, and maybe I'm wrong, that it was the Democratic Party that really promoted that notion, the notion of no God in schools, okay? And as a result today, even in the universities, if you speak about, for example, creation against or even present creation equal to evolution theories, you may get fired. And then you have this situation where if you open a charter school in the United States, or in all the 50 states, I think generally, the first mandate is you cannot teach religion. Hence so otherwise the federal government will not fund you. So that's the first protocol, you cannot teach religion. The back end of this, we've noticed, is that the Republican Party is bringing out what they call voucher systems, supporting Islamic, Christian, parochial schools, for example, Jewish schools, religious schools, through funding from a different pathway. Almost like to equalize the balance, to say, okay, we are funding, we're funding charter schools that cannot teach religion, but I think as a democracy, we also need to promote religion, and we should also support them. You've got this little special interest group that says, no, I'm a taxpayer and nobody should be allowed in public funding to speak about God. And, we are basically an atheistic society, whereas America, the dollar bill says, in God we trust, right? It was founded by God-conscious people. Benjamin Franklin, everybody believed in God. So in your opinion, this is typically presented as that the Democrats tend to be more atheistic, more agnostic, of course, liberal, which is good, but to a state of actually promoting things that may be antithetical to the Islamic principles or Christian principles, right? Mm-hmm. And you are a representative in that party. Do you draw a fine balance in that? And of course, it's not an easy task, even in the Republican Party, they present themselves as pro-religion, but there's a lot of stuff in there that's not religion. And we agree with that. But just as a general aura that I'm a Democrat, and since I'm a Democrat, that means I'm liberal. You see, I am more open. Maybe I'm not pro-religion. People see me as that. I'm not declaring that I'm a Democrat or a Republican. I'm just saying, assuming I was. And someone says, well, I'm a Republican. Oh, you must be very, very strong on certain ethical rules. For example, you're against abortion, and so on and so forth. That's why you're a Republican. So from your perspective, having heard these comments being made consistently for a long period of time, what do you have to say about this? Is there truth in that, or do you think it's conflated?
I mean, it's a complicated subject. I think overall, without getting into the weeds of the school stuff, I think you used a key word when you talked about the Republicans, when you said appearance. I think that as Muslims, we should be looking at the values. And I think we as Muslims stand for justice and for equality. And those are some of the things that we've learned from our faith. Brother Muhammad, as you said, from Imam Hussein, for example. And when you have a party that supports expanding social service programs for the less fortunate, and you have a party that supports expanding healthcare and making it a right, you have a party that supports bringing in people who are fleeing persecution into our country and making them citizens and embracing them. Those, I think, are values of faith, although they're not tied to a religion. And then you have a party that says they're religious, but they demonize people of other faiths. They separate children from their families at the border. They cut access to healthcare. They cut benefits for the less fortunate. So then you weigh that out, right? Like, what is religion really about? Is it about what we say, or is it about what we do? I think on the school issue, it's a little bit more complicated. I'm not an expert in it, to be quite honest. But one interesting thing that came up in Florida that I've kind of been around, because that's where I'm originally from, is that the money that's been going to charter schools from the state, a lot of some of the religious text has anti-Islam and anti-Muslim language in what we're teaching the kids in these schools. So that's the other question when we're talking about faith. How are we talking about it? How is it regulated? How are we making sure it's balanced? I think that's the sensitivity. And to me, I would rather have no religion than have skewed religion, right? So obviously that's not a universal problem. I don't know, every state's different, every county's different, but that's just one other consideration to think about from my view as we think through that piece.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Farouk, for your comments. And we're fast approaching the conclusion of tonight's program. And I want to emphasize that, as Brother Hassanain mentioned, we're not here to endorse any candidate or any campaign. We've, of course, just brought Brother Farouk on to share his views as someone who works with the Joe Biden presidential campaign, and to hear him out and to hear his perspective. So as we approach the conclusion of tonight's program, Brother Farouk, do you have any final thoughts you want to share and leave with the viewers?
No, I think I really, really appreciate Hajj for having me on the program tonight. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be with everyone. I hope everyone's staying safe. I know this is a very different, unfortunately, Ramadan than we're accustomed to. And I don't know what the election is going to look like, right? Like right now, we're operating virtually, even in our campaign. But as we discussed earlier, no matter what party you're in or what side you're on, our voices matter. And we have to be at the table. Keith Ellison, who was our first Muslim congressman and now is the Attorney General of Minnesota, he always used to say, if you're not on the table, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that as a community, we've been on the menu for far too long. And I hope that we can come together and use this year as a time to show that we're at the table and that our voices matter.
Thank you, Brother Farouk. Brother Muhammad, any final thoughts?
A couple of words. I love what you did say, Farouk, about, okay, forget about what we say, what we do. I mean, this is what our faith is about. It's always about doing good for all of us and mankind and womankind and all of creation on this earth. So we shouldn't be scared about their title, their name. It doesn't matter, because God is the most greatest. And we are just his servants to do good on this earth. So if we can keep doing that and not be scared of being censured, and just stand up for what is right and against injustice, I think we'll succeed. So I hope, Farouk, you can do something. If not, the next group of us will get that chance, hopefully, to do that too. Thank you, Farouk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Muhammad. Brother Hassanain, any final departing thoughts?
Yeah, look, Brother Farouk, we say this and, we're proud of you, the fact that you are proactive and you're doing something. People will always, no matter where you are, no matter what you do, people will always find faults in what you do, even if you're impeccable about the good that you do. So we're here to support you on that, and we're here to back you up wherever you go. When you endorse a particular candidate, you're right. With all due respect, Biden to me appears much more civil than the other side. Obviously, the insanity that's happening now has really caused this country to really take a nosedive in so many ways, and it's sad, given the fact that there's so much great potential in this country, and it's sad. So whatever the presidency turns out to be, we pray for your success, and should Biden win this election, then we hope you become very effective and successful. And that you constantly also take advice from others to sort of give you that guidance and shape, because we're all in need of guidance at all time. And we hope that you will be able to affect change within legislation, within our systems, that our next generations can benefit from. So, we pray for you, and inshallah, we pray for this country to become a better country than what it is now in what it's doing, internally and externally. And I really think that it needs people like yourselves and ourselves to be the voices, especially you, having that connection to the higher positions because of where you are. I know in Canada, Brother Kazim Habib is quite active with Trudeau, I think, am I right, Brother Muhammad?
Yes.
Yeah. So, it's very nice to see our young brothers and sisters getting involved. Rashida Tlaib, for example, she's an amazing voice in Congress, as a representative, right? So we need more voices. Keith Ellison was was a breath of fresh air in government, even when he took his oath, put his hand on the Quran and took the oath, right? That's the change. And then you have the presidency who used to say Judeo-Christian principles. Now they're saying Judeo-Christian Islamic principles. I think that's profound as a change within this last few decades, right? And it takes people like you who penetrate governments, regardless of what those governments are. And I'll tell you, no matter which side wins, even if there was a third party, there would be some level of corruption. And my sincere advice in this month of Ramadan, and I don't need to tell you because you resonate that, but do everything possible to eradicate corruption and do everything possible to make them aware that there is a God who watches you, and be careful with your judgments. For any damage you cause that is willful will be used, and God will bring it forth. And why go there when you have that power to legislate something good for humanity? And I pray for your success, inshallah, in this blessed month of Ramadan. And we're very pleased that you've joined us, and added that voice as a civic engager, as a civic servant within the Muslim community. And we're proud to see that you represent that. May Allah give you the tawfiq for you and your family, inshallah. And our prayers are with your success, inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Hassanain. Inshallah, we'll conclude tonight's program with a short dua, as always, requesting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase our ability to memorize the Holy Quran in this blessed month of Ramadan. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma arhamni bitaraki al-ma'asi abadan ma abqaytani. فارحمني من تكلف ما لا ينيني وارزقني حسن المنظر فيما يرضيك عني والزم قلبي حفظ كتابك كما علمتني وارزقني أن أتلو على النحو الذي يرضيك عني اللهم نور بصري واشرح به صدري وفرح به قلبي وأطلق به لساني واستعمل به بدني وقوني على ذلك وأعني عليه إنه لا معين عليه إلا أنت La ilaha illa ant. With that, I want to thank all the panelists for joining. Thank you, Brother Farouk, for joining us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you the strength to try and bring about positive change in our society and in our world. And we want to thank all the viewers, as always, for joining us. With that, we'll conclude tonight's program. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.